won't go in great detail, but there was no other aircraft fighter during World War II that had this kind of protection. And that P-47 was literally legendary on its ability to bring back the pilots. And we'll have one here telling us a little bit about that, bringing them home. They had so much protection. They were so large. It was actually very, very impressive. I'm going to talk about those guns. Those, and we have Dr. Browning here, but he's still trying to find it related. Browning 50 caliber machine guns, 8 of them. And give you an idea of the number of rounds. The maximum load was, you'd think there's a lot, but there's not. Only 425 rounds per gun. And typically they only have 300 rounds of gun per gun. And you only had about 20 seconds total. If you just held the trigger, boom, 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 it's over. Yes?
You read about guys burning out the barrels. How long could you actually fire before you had ruined the gun? I mean, could you hold it for 20 seconds? Would it really
That's a good question.
I don't remember anybody ever burning the barrels out.
Okay. One advantage is you're usually at high altitude, very cold. And if you notice on those P47s, we'll get out there later, you'll see them, it's just a stainless steel sleeve. They aren't, quote, like typical air-cooled for a Browning machine gun. The thing is, they were loaded and charged on the ground. So they had their armor, get in there, load the shells. Here's an example, just like that. These are 50 cal bullets, so they'd be loading 300 typically up to 425 in each tray, and we'll have somebody who actually built those trays here, and we'll talk about that shortly. Then there's basically a switch, a safety switch, that they'd have to turn on when they're up in the air ready to go. And we've all seen some fabulous bore sightings, because you don't want the guns shooting every which way. They typically do that on the ground, and they could adjust them at any time. The key was, and what was typical, as to what your target would be, because you want to really have that firepower of all 8 of them hitting at that point. So they would adjust them anywhere typically from 200 to 300 yards. And I don't know what you remember as to what the adjustment that you would use on your bore sighting.
Pretty close to that.
Okay.
All that was done on the ground.
Yes, done on the ground, correct. But they could adjust it coming back in on the next flight. Again, it's whatever they're going after, what was their particular reference point and what they liked, how close they wanted to get to see the whites of their eyes before they start taking them out. Now, for all you rookie pilots, wannabe P47s, there was a typical problem with that old technology setup. Again, they're armed on the ground, they're registered, ready to go. They gave some guidelines as to what kind of airspeed you needed on a dive when you're shooting. It was typically 270 miles an hour. And of course they're telling you need to shoot in bursts. But one of the key problems with the inability of a rookie pilot to get the job done during a dogfight and engage properly, because typically the dogfights would be fractions of a second or a few seconds, that's it, and it was over. Guess what the #1 problem was for a rookie P47 pilot?
Running out of money?
No. You got to flip the switch on. You have to activate it. Yeah, I mean, you're excited, they're coming all over. And you don't have a checklist that says combat, I'm in combat. I mean, you have them for taking off, in flight, etc. But there wasn't a checklist, as far as I know, when it's time to go for combat. So somewhere up here, you better, and I bet you the second time, you always remember, switch on, then you can pull the trigger. And then the other problem you kind of alluded to, from what I gather, we got an expert here to tell us. The number 2 problem was not shooting in bursts and holding the trigger too long. And then you don't have that many bullets, 20 seconds worth of firing. So if you're flying around, you held it too long, and there went 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15, and all of a sudden you only have a few seconds left. One thing they did do, it's not in the manual, but my understanding is to give them an idea that when you, because there's no gauge, no nothing that tells you where you're at. And believe me, you're not sitting there counting 1, 2, 3, I shot 10 seconds worth of bullets. They put tracers towards the end, so they would know they're getting in to the end. So either you hold back, or you're going to have a little reserve. You know, there's still 2 more enemy out there I need to get home, so I need a few rounds in reserve in order to get out of there. Now, kind of the problem. Yes, question.
Those tracers also help to know if you were shooting at the right angle too.
Correct. You could see where your bullets were going. Exactly.
On the ground, was those switches safety wired, or if you initiate fire, would they shoot anything by accident right on the ground?
Oh, if you pull the trigger, yeah, and you had it switch on.
In other words, they weren't safety wired or anything?
No. And here's another thing. It's got to be safe. And I don't know how many times this is ever a problem, but when you come back home, if you didn't shoot, or you still have rounds in the chamber, the switch goes off when you land. Because if you land, the switch is on. Things happen. Exactly. Good point. Now, everybody who's a pilot, yes?
So you basically had like 3,200 rounds on board?
For each gun. So times 8.
400 for each gun, 8 guns, what,
Right.
3,200? Now, when you fired, did all guns
Yes,
shoot at
all,
once?
yes, you could not do singly or whatever. It was just automatic, all 8 went. Correct. Yes?
Other than the tracers, what else? What kind of tips did they use in their ammunition?
Good question. I would assume that most of the time they were using armor piercing.
Yeah, that's all.
That was
Did they
pretty
use
standard.
incendiary at all for explosive?
No. We didn't.
Okay.
Yeah, good question.
And the power of those bullets, you're going to get into them and how they could destroy trains and
Yes.
things here. Yes.
From what I've heard in my reading, basically, I mean, the P47 was a powerful ground support used to take out enemy supplies, Normandy, other invasions, Battle of the Bulge. Convoys of trucks. My understanding is that a P47, just with their 8 guns, 50 caliber, could actually blow a 6-wheeled supply truck off the road coming in, because you've got that mass and inertia of speed, 300 to 400 miles an hour or more, plus the weight of the lead, plus the speed coming, that projectile coming out of those 8, all congregated would take a 6-wheel truck right off the road. Typically it's used for taking out trains. I mean, these are, old-fashioned massive locomotives. They'd hit the locomotive, take them out. I mean, those are rock solid. I don't know how many tons locomotive, but they would stop locomotives. Pretty impressive. When you think about all this armament, I mean, you think about particularly small aircraft, you're always worried about, how you, small aviation aircraft, if somebody's 150 pounds or 200 or 250, how you move them around, or if you got 100 pounds of baggage. Well, you can only imagine when you're loading up with your armament. And sometimes, and I don't know if you did that, it seemed like it was standard just to load 6 out of the 8 machine guns. I'm assuming
We loaded all 8.
yeah, I would think you'd want all 8. But that's how the setup is in the traditional weight and balance chart. But to give you an idea, when you load just 300 rounds in each one, if you got 8 of them, you basically have 600 pounds of these 50 cal bullets loaded up. That's a lot of weight that you're adding to your aircraft. And then plus all, we won't even go into all the auxiliary fuel, etc. Empty on that P47 is 10,000 pounds. fully loaded with all that stuff, it's almost double. It's 17,500 pounds. And still able to go at high speed, high altitude. I don't know of any other aircraft that can typically do that. Certainly not during 1944, 45. And to give you an idea, we have an example here. This part. This is a World War II Browning M2. Now, it's a little lighter weight that they put on the aircraft, but this basically is the same mechanism. And you can imagine that there's 8 of these buried in. They're not charged like this, but there's 8 of these, 4 on each wing that's buried in there. Massive weight. Yeah. That's the museum, by the way. Some of the stuff we have. On your same page 72 in your manual, it gives a nice idea of the payload for the armaments. Not only have the machine guns, you have the capability at the same time carrying bombs. So you can carry a 500 bomb underneath the belly, 1,000-pound bombs on either wing. They also have the capability of carrying chemical weapons, but as far as I know, tanks, I don't think they ever used them. I think the intention of why it was in the design, this is just my guess, I don't know. But because so much chemical weapons was used during World War I, they anticipated the enemy to use chemical warfare. And of course there was gas masks, everything else that was distributed during World War II. To anticipate that, they did have the capability to put tanks on them. Interestingly enough, they also did use rockets. A lot of people don't know that during World War II. And these were mounted underneath, near the bomb, underneath the wings, and they would have basically six rockets, and they're basically the equivalent firepower of a 105 millimeter howitzer. Now, they weren't very accurate like the smart rockets, etc. today, but they did use them very effectively if they're in close, and probably scare the hell out of them for sure. All those rockets come shooting at them. And they were actually somewhat sophisticated. They had a fuse that they could actually set on impact or change them for a certain range when they would explode. Now that one, unlike the guns, they could actually trigger that to single individual rockets, or they could just full blast and have all 6 rockets take off. And
You know,
basically,
Mr.
if they were to use, yes,
Do you know how they would fire? Was that something that would be like a toggle, or
they must have had a switch. Yes, I'm not sure exactly.
Separate switch.
Yeah.
And the diameter of the rockets were 45 millimeters, the size of your fist, very
Correct.
large.
Very effective against locomotives.
There we go. He was
What about tanks? What about
Tanks
tanks?
too.
Now on the chemical spray weapon, the way it was worked is basically like a agricultural spray. They'd want to have a formation, not that they ever used it, but they'd go in formation. They didn't have much area, but basically it'd be spraying in that way. Not the most effective way. Plus, have to take care of or wonder about wind, etc. Okay. Next, I'm just going to go brief. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time about the cockpit since a lot of that's already being covered, etc. But I did want to, you can bring that out a little bit. Oh, you cut right here. Oh. But as you can see, there's a lot to this and what's in there. But typically, like most of the fighters, trainers, etc., that throttle quadrant, everything's on your left-hand side. You're showing here one of the fuel switches. Of course, you've got the gauges all over the place. There'll be radios. Here's the stick in between. You're sitting here. Your rudder pedals. And we do have an example here. Get a chance to come up and look at that. After all your training, you've learned how to operate the P47. You're going to climb in that cockpit. To me, the really interesting thing is what you are required to wear. I mean, typically you go in a cockpit today, just make sure you got your hat, if you need glasses, your headset, you're pretty much good to go. But first of all, you're going to have your helmet. That's required. So your classic aviator's helmet that you see in the movies, that was there. Goggles. That was required. Gloves. I mean, things can get hot, cold up there. It depends what's going on. You want to have your gloves on. And again, no Nomex. You have your life vest. And you're wearing your parachute. Actually, in your seat, that's what you're sitting on. That's your cushion, but you've got it on, ready to go. It's a good thing today, and even the training aircraft that you have your students, you don't have to wear a parachute.
You hope not, anyway.
Depends on the student.
Yeah. All right, you're going to need your oxygen mask, because when you get up to high altitude, this is not a pressurized cabin. I mean, you're going 40,000 feet. I mean, that's way up there. You better be having some oxygen. Not only that, you're going to have a first aid kit. You never know what happens or where you land. And some of them had a one-man life raft. I don't know if you ever had to wear a life raft. It was typically over water that they would require. So typically if you're over land, you're not wearing that. But if you look on page 37, it shows the guys all geared up. I mean, you're ready to go. That's a lot of stuff to be clambering into, getting in. So typically they would have your crew chief helping you in, strapping you in, making sure you're all set to go. But there was quite a bit involved in that. Any questions? Yes, oh my God.
Was there a sidearm involved in that?
Typically in the vest, there would be a 45.
Yeah.
Correct, that was standard issue.
Did they have any heating system in the aircraft?
I'm sure they did. I don't.
Yes.
Yeah.
It wasn't a suit that you plugged in?
No.
Oh, no, yeah, correct. Just keep the cockpit warm.
Did they have a urinal?
Do they have a tube?
We had one.
Good.
Tube.
Okay.
Tube of the funnel.
Yes, Bill.
One thing that's very important, when you're on a long flight, you don't have a portable john you can go to. So you have to be able to relieve yourself. How did they do that?
With the tube with the funnel on the end. That was it.
I'll give you some words from World War II. It's kind of interesting. I mean, and even to this day, they still refer to bandits, being enemy aircraft, bogies, just being unidentified aircraft. But do any of you know who the big friends are? Got it. Bombers. Do you know what a circus is? This is combined fighter and bomber. And their intention is to attract and get the fighters to come up so they can take them out. And a rodeo. Does anybody know what a rodeo is up in the sky? So this is when the fighter groups, P-47 squadrons, fighter groups would go out on their own without the bombers, looking for trouble. Okay, I got one other thing on.
What was the size of an average pilot, and was that cockpit, this gentleman here, our pilot, he's not of a large stature, but would there be a limit of a large man fitting in that cockpit?
They're pretty good
Well,
sized
it's a
cockpits.
pretty good sized cockpit.
What?
Yeah.
I guess we had some guys that weighed 175, something like that.
But height was not a problem. Height and weight, not much of a problem.
Height more than weight.
Height more than weight, so maybe 6'3" might have a harder time.
Yeah.
I know one P-47 pilot in the 56 fighter group is 6'2",
Yeah.
and he's a tall end. But you gotta remember, you're sitting behind a big round engine, and when you go out there and look at it, that's the difference between round engine fighters and inline engine, is that fuselage is gonna basically follow the shape of the engine. And I've sat in the one depicted in that poster there, that's out in Oregon now at Tillamook. And it's, you know, I'm a fat guy, 6 foot tall, and it's roomy. I mean, it's
It's
a
plenty roomy.
nice, comfortable Cadillac of a cockpit to sit in.
Well, you gotta think too, the average height in the 40s was 2 or 3 inches shorter
That's right.
than what it is now. So you didn't have to deal with that.
Because submariners get excluded once they get to be 6'6", I believe. Like David Robinson grew after he was in Naval Academy, and he couldn't no longer get in a submarine, but I didn't know if there was any height restrictions for planes.
I know for belly gunners on B-17s, I think it was 5'6", and then if you were shorter than that, they put a cushion under your butt. Because you had to line it up with the gun sights.
Okay, the other thing during World War II that's quite a bit different than today, our allies, the Brits and the Americans, they shared this P-47. And I don't know how often they mixed in the squadrons. Typically they'd be separate, but a lot of times they would gather together. And of course, we supposedly all speak English, but in the British lexicon, you might know some of the quote American for this. I assume most of you know what an aerodrome is. It's an airport, airfield. But who knows what an electric accumulator is? Good job, yeah. We call them batteries. It's a long word. Petrol, everybody knows that that's a good way to distinguish what the Americans between a German and who an American was. Windscreen. In fact, we've got one here. This is off P-47. This is part of the armor. You can come up and look at it. About 1 inch thick. It's bullet resistant, not actually bulletproof, because it depends on what angle, what you're being shot with, but most of the time. But it's only in the front, it's not on the sides of that, whether you call it a windscreen or windshield. And then does anybody know what a main plane is? The Brits call them main planes. Oh, you got some damage on your main plane. Better get a fix. Very good, yeah, it's a wing.
It's what?
A wing. They call it the main plane. Yeah. Yeah, very good. Any other questions? Well, good. If we want to take like a 5-minute break, we're running a little bit behind, but we've got some special guests we want to hear from today. And these are those that experience building the P-47s and also flying the P-47s.